My name's Ivan Fairhall. I'm the Managing Director of Pivotal Metals. Pivotal is the exploration and development projects for copper and critical metals in Quebec. We've got an advanced, large-scale, open-pittable project called Horden Lake, and we've also got a really exciting exploration package in the south of Quebec called the Belterre projects with very high-grade copper-nickel mineralisation and PGEs. And we're excited to be exploring in Quebec and moving projects forward.
Ivan, good to see you again. Been a while. I think we obviously met through, Mawson and then your spin out Southern Cross Gold, which seems to have done rather well.
It's been a phenomenal story. Very, very, very impressive. Very impressive series of events there. People made a lot of money.
Yeah, right. Well, look, we're going to talk about your projects in Quebec. Good place to be. But looking at your valuation, you're right at the kind of entry point, shall we say, the start point here. Now, you joined 2 years ago. What have you been doing?
Yeah, so that's right. It's actually coming up. I realised only in a few weeks. I've been with Pivotal for 2 years, and really we've spent the majority of that time taking our flagship project, our main project, Horden Lake, and pulling together what I saw when I joined was actually a really nice project, but at the time there was a lot of loose ends that never tied together, and it's important when you sit down with investors and serious money managers that all the loose ends tie together. And so things like metallurgical test work, dimensioning the upside, updating the resource so that all of these things add up and fit together. That's really been the story of the last 2 years. And then more recently, we've finally got back to doing some exploration and more earlier stage generative exploration. We're pretty excited about that piece of work that's coming up, but a lot of the effort and time has gone into Horden Lake, and I now think we've actually really got a project there that makes a lot of sense, and so it's been a big focus, and it's a big part of kind of I come from a project development background, and shaping projects to move them forward is something I really enjoy doing.
Okay, right. Now you've got two projects, obviously Horden Lake, and you've got Belterre as well. I want to work out where I'm focused, because I read the announcement back in April with the MRE. You've got a resource there, copper equivalent numbers though. So can you tell me about what your focus is, where you think you are going to be putting your energy?
Yeah, like I said, and you point out, the MRE was a culmination of quite a lot of work, and combined with a bunch of geophysics we did in the process of doing our work for the MRE. It's really created a project where we see significant scale. We've actually defined significant scale at the project level. We can see a lot of upside, and like I said, it all kind of hangs together technically. There's been a lot of robust technical work that's gone underneath there, and we've created something of real value. Now, the challenge obviously in this market is, and you look at our market cap, is that that's not being reflected in our share price. Now, we're not alone in that situation, but we do reflect on that as a time for where we're thinking about capital allocation decisions. And we've got these other projects which in fact we acquired before we acquired Horden Lake, and intended to go and do exploration in Quebec for those projects, and it was a very opportunistic thing that Horden Lake came our way. And we've got some exploration projects that a lot of investors are actually very keen for us to pursue. They're very high grade, and they've got some really excitement factor associated with them. And it's now time to allocate some capital to those whilst we continue to de-risk Horden Lake, as well as work on surfacing some of that value that we've created clearly in the asset level, but we need to get that reflected in our share price.
Right, but it's more about that. Well, there's more than just de-risking, because I say that's everyone talks that game, and I'm not quite sure what that means in a lot of cases. You mentioned where you are today in terms of valuation. Companies like you are cash constrained. It's been a tough market, and there's a lot of people shouting for attention out there. So how do you and the board articulate a plan where people can sort of say, well, how a small company can fund even a production scale starter pits type scenario and get into revenue, or keep drilling, try and extend that strike and drive some value from maybe someone else, strategic partner, spinner, however you want to do this. So I'm intrigued about how companies like you kind of survive, thrive, and fund ultimately the plan. So can you just share your thinking?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think to characterize, it's all about access to capital, right? And investor base and scale and market timing. All of these things intersect in strategy effectively. Where the company chooses, how the company accesses capital, and where it chooses to allocate that. Now, as you recognise, with the valuation with where we're at, capital comes, is relatively expensive, and so we need to be really, really efficient with where we put incremental dollars, and we need to generate a return from that. And we put a lot of money into Horden Lake in the last couple of years, and we haven't really seen that reflected in the share price. Now, I don't think, my genuine personal view, my background, I'm an engineer, I come from a project development background, I come from a private equity background, invest in development stage assets, I've invested my own money in this company. Like, I really believe there is a project of significant value there at Horden Lake, but you can't be ignorant of market cycle, market timing, investor appetite. We exist in a world where liquidity is very low. There's limited appetite for longer term investment out there in the junior sector, in the junior of the junior sector, which is where we find ourselves. And so you need to attract capital as well as deploy it. And we see that those opportunities for high grade gold and base metals down at Belterre are things that people are telling us they'd love to see us go and do some work on. Horden Lake's not going anywhere. That there's work that we can carry on, things like metallurgical test work. Like, you said, de-risking the project, bit of a throwaway line. I agree, but you take metallurgical test work and you, for a relatively small amount of money in the scheme of things, you can actually make substantial changes in, you can make a breakthrough in metallurgical recovery or do things like ore sorting, which changes the whole economic profile of the project. The return on that from an NPV perspective is phenomenal compared to the cost of exploration and growing ounces, growing tons incrementally by putting in drill holes. And so that's an example of things that we can do on that project. They take time, a relatively small amount of money. We're focusing our attention on things like that. And then there's also, you mentioned strategic interest. Well, that's actually a part of it. Like validation. How do you get validation into these projects? You attract a different type of money to the project. So we continue to talk to groups about thinking about how they can see an opportunity and hopefully we get a chance to talk about it. But I feel very vindicated around the transactions like the Central Asian Metals and Kinterra play for Antler, that these mid-scale copper projects in good locations, they actually have significant value for future development, future companies that are actually interested in building mines. They can see the value there when the market often can't. And we saw a very good case study of that there. And so you try to attract interest into the project or into the company, into the asset. There's things that you can do there and look to change the narrative around the project and also market timing. When there's investor appetite, copper goes on a bit of a run, like that. You see these assets have substantial value, and you got to preserve that. You need to try to preserve that value on an area per share basis, and so that's where this careful allocation of capital thing comes into it. And it's a time to push on certain assets, and we see a good opportunity on our Belterre projects, and Horden Lake's not going anywhere.
Okay, so you're not going to spend money carelessly, or where it's not being appreciated. That's a better framing, I think. And at the moment, you think Horden Lake perhaps needs. What do you think it's going to need to attract a strategic? Because we see sort of new business models out there where people are saying, well, actually, maybe let's get into a kind of nearer term production type scenario, where people talk about starter pits or phase 1, phase 2, etc. Are there companies out there which kind of like that model, or is it the eternal Canadian model of, well, not an Aussie company, but Canadian asset, where you just got to drill to the edge of the envelope?
I think that genuinely, when you talk to strategics, they're interested in how you monetize the resource, and that's not about eternal growth. Like I do think, I think you're right that the Canadian junior market is more, has the needle pointed more towards drill, never put a pin in it. How big can you get it? That is definitely not the prevailing view on the ASX. ASX, I don't know all the reasons, but I think the ASX are more interested in genuine economics, real, what's a pathway to production, timeline to get there, cost, development cost, and they like to see the economics of the project laid out. And so I probably am that way biased myself a little bit. I think that these things are valuable because they can be mined. And mining companies, by definition, also want to mine them. So if you think about how, the pathway forward, it is very much focused around the economic credibility of the project. So things like metallurgical test work are important. I think there's looking at the resource, and you talk about high grade starter pits, and that's a good example of. And it, my background has a lot to do with project development scenarios. Come from project engineering background, and what is the right development sequence and scenario. How can you use latent infrastructure in the area? Is there a high grade starter pit? All of these types of things that requires quite a lot of thinking and a bit of engineering. And just because you're not drilling a hole in the project doesn't mean that you're not actually exploring the best way to advance the project. And if you can show that pathway, then you can attract the capital to the project, and then you can move it forward in the most appropriate fashion. You need support to move these things forward, and you've got to be able to lay that out.
Right, but is it of a scale which would be interesting enough for someone to maybe fund an economic study phase approach on a small starter pit type scenario?
Well, I think the project has significant scale. We're talking, there's 400,000 tons of copper equivalent there, and that's more than 50% copper. It's sort of 65% copper, and not to want to just unnecessarily harp on about the Antler project, but Antler project was 30,000 tons of copper equivalent for 12 years in a reserve. Okay, it was a reserve, and it was 50% copper and 50% other things, precious metals predominantly, and some base metals. So yeah, I 100% feel that this asset has scale to be meaningful. You're talking sub 20, things get a little bit uninteresting. North of 2025 copper equivalent, you've met that first scale hurdle. Bigger is always better. Blah blah blah. That's all great, but I definitely think the asset's got scale. So there's no questioning that in my mind. Now, what ultimate development scenario gets you to that scale, and the ultimate scale of the business is a function of a lot of things, and there's work to be done there, and there's a lot of exploration upside here as well that will come in at the right point as you grow the resource. It's completely open to depth. There's along strike opportunities both locally and then also regionally. I think that there's opportunities to grow the business in scale, exploration scale. There's things can evolve over time there, and I think there's no single answer, but you've got to be able to move it forward incrementally, and that's what we're focused on. How do we get it to the next stage?
Okay, so in terms of unlocking this value trap that you appear to be in, you obviously think that Belterre has the profile of the types of assets which are going to be rewarded more by the market. So what exactly is the opportunity at Belterre?
Yeah, well, you think Belterre is an extremely exciting exploration story. It's quite different, I suppose, to Horden Lake. First of all, you're in an absolutely phenomenal location, infrastructure rich. I use ASX analogy, like it's kind of the Abitibi is the Kalgoorlie of Canada. You've got a dozen operating mines, you've got latent mills. It's a little bit like Game of Thrones. I always say WA's like Game of Thrones, WA Gold's like Game of Thrones. You've got all of these assets that are stranded in mills, and there's all these deals and optionality around assets that can be done there. And the hurdle for discovery, because of that real amount of infrastructure that's already there, the hurdle for discovery is quite a lot lower. If you don't have to necessarily come up with a standalone project, then you look through the world in a very different lens. So that's kind of the macro view on the area. At the project level, what we have is a pretty large land package, got 160 square kilometres of greenstone belt that we consolidated some project areas and put some sort of asset and exploration IP together that has not been together for a long time, and particularly in a modern context. And we've got a really well-established mineral event over a project area. We've got two large project areas that maybe are separated by about 15, 20 kilometres between them. But all of these projects share this characteristic of having very high grades of mineralisation that have been discovered in in the work that's been done and been discovered in outcrop in the 60s, and no one's really looked outside of it. And so when they've got onto something that's often not been particularly big, there's sort of a small mine that ran there 600,000 tons of copper nickel PGM. There's been some really super high grade discoveries. Those assets themselves quite close together called Midran and Lotta. They're quite small, but the grades that they run are phenomenal. And my exploration manager here, he's ex-Falconbridge, from the nickel copper PGM group, like been all over the world, been to all the big deposits. And he just said, these grades, you just don't see. Grades of mineralized, a very intense mineralizing event. It's spread over a wide area and no one's really looked. And that's a really compelling opportunity for us to vector off the known and to have a chance of making a new discovery. And that's we've got an exploration strategy which we can go into as to how we de-risk that, which we're doing at the moment. But that's an exciting opportunity. And for a relatively small amount of money to go and test those targets, it's something that we've got investors, and even as a company, it's been our strategy to do that for a while, and now's the opportunity to go and do that.
Well, I guess outcropping high grade is good grades as well, historical data, which is nice. But what more data do you have that suggests that this is maybe a district scale system rather than sort of isolated pods?
Yeah, okay. So like I said, 1960s discoveries predominantly across the whole project, and all except for one. There's probably a dozen occurrences, 6 what you would call bona fide deposits, and all except for one were outcropping. So that was the history, and then there's been a few phases of exploration that have come and gone with juniors, all owned by juniors, over the years, and you've seen them gravitate back to the same discoveries, and drilling. The density of drilling in particular in and around those existing occurrences is very, very high. You step away for 100 meters of some really nice minerals, and it's not a drill hole. It might be one drill hole versus 100 in 1 to 100 kind of ratio. And so what's changed in the last decade or so? There's been aerial geophysics being done, so VTEM, and there's a bunch of anomalies over the project that have never been drilled. And so essentially what's new, what are we doing, and what's Pivotal specifically doing about it, is we're taking those aerial anomalies from the VTEM, and we're going over there and we're applying fixed loop ground-based EM, so a high resolution EM survey over the top of these anomalies. Well, first of all, we're going in and making sure that there's, we believe that they're a real anomaly, it's a cultural feature or anything like that. We do some mapping, make sure the right host rocks are there, and we see the geology. We see the geology stack up that this could be a real target, and then we go in there and do fixed loop. And out of the fixed loop, what you get is actually a very clearly defined drill target. And we've now got 3 or 4 very clear targets. We're in the middle of a big geophysics program over a bunch of other targets, and so we're looking to release more targets as we do more geophysics and generate more targets, and we get quite clear new targets close to known mineralization that's very high grade, never seen a drill hole. And these are conductors that marry up to known mineralization. You've got something over here. Like, it's a really exciting opportunity to go and test something new, and with new data, new methods, and a new approach. That's the thing, is people haven't looked outside the known. They've been sucked back into the, frankly, it's a bit of a junior kind of thing. Go back to the known, put in a couple of director specials, follow up on the known. It's a low risk way of generating results. Tempting, but it's not how you make a new discovery.
So how much more work have you got to do? So you're talking about these sort of, you've identified these sort of undrilled conductors at Shanty Lake and some extensions at Lorraine Mine, etc. How much more data do you need before you start sort of prioritizing these for, drilling whenever you get around to drilling?
Not too much more. I mean, those targets are drillable. So it's really about how many targets can we generate and prioritizing these, what are the best, what have the best characteristics, depth, orientation, size, conductivity. That's a prioritization of drill ready targets. But so you can't actually get much better defined than a fixed loop conductor plate that has dimensionally being put around it with an orientation and a strike and a clear drill target. This is not like going out there and drilling a blob on a map. So never got a throwaway line, and I've never seen a geophysical survey that didn't line up like a Christmas tree. They all have a habit of lining up, but these aren't just blobs on the map. These are quite well defined targets. So on the base metals, the magmatic sulfide stuff, It's really about prioritizing targets that we've generated. We've also got quite a lot of gold. We've got a number of areas of high-grade gold that also form part of the exploration pipeline that we're working on as well. Slightly
Right,
different.
you did that. I think you did that soil sampling, extending the high grade gold corridor at Lorraine. But you've kind of got a measurement in Lorraine. You've kind of got this copper, nickel, PGM, these targets. So you talked about listening to the market and saying, well, what is the market rewarding? Will that also be part of what informs your drilling? Do you go after the kind of gold system, or do you kind of chase copper, nickel, PGMs?
Yeah, I definitely get asked every day, you got any more gold? There's definitely, because it's a big package. This is a big package. And these are very distinct. Like, people get confused that we call it one name. They're like, guys, you got at some level, you've got 3 projects, and another level, you've got 25 project areas, if you think about it carefully. And so they all have each of their own characteristics. You've got, and I mean, even at the Lorraine mine, you have the magmatic sulfide mineralization was true massive sulfides that were mined there, and you've got repeats and extensions of that. You can see it in the soil survey, you can see it in the EM survey. You've got conductors that sit outside of the mined area. They, great place to look for a mine next to a mine. You got that opportunity, and then running literally right parallel to it, they found it in the underground development, a probably related but very distinct mineral system, which was copper quartz veining. So very different to the magmatic sulfide mineralization, but right next to it, to the extent that they discovered it during the underground development. And there was sampling along a vein. So they developed along a vein, and channel sampled along that vein 28 meters at 45 grams a ton. And this sat right kind of in the footwall of effectively of that mine. And the soil sampling you refer to, there was that instance in the mine. It's been tracked about 600 meters along strike at surface. As you can see, there's starting to build up some strike extent, and that's why that soil anomaly is very interesting, because it's at 1.5 kilometers away from the mine. A gram a ton soil is actually a highly anomalous figure for gold in soils. We did need to do some more infill and work. We're still working on exactly how all of these things link together, but that's building strike extent. And it's not just that project on the property. There's actually some other parts of the property. I mean, we're still going through a lot of the historical data ourselves, and there's more gold opportunities there, which we're keen to share with the market as we continue to generate targets. Effectively, explorations around taking the data, working out what you think you've got, going and doing more work in the field and building up the targets. And we're going through that. It's just a lot of project areas to work through.
Well, yeah, and look, with Quebec, there's been a lot of M&A in the last year. A lot of there's some great projects, great problems to work in. That goes without saying. But what's your end game in all this? I mean, what can you realistically expect to do in terms of realization or value creation, however you want to position it?
At the Belter or out of the whole portfolio?
Well, I guess the portfolio, because you're saying you're coming at it from two angles, and for small companies having lots of optionality is great, but it's also quite expensive. So I'm just interested in how you manage the shareholders' expectations, but also manage the capital at hand.
Yeah, well, look, when you tell people what you're going to do to allocate any particular amount of capital, and so what we're laying out an exploration program at the Belter, which in the short to medium term is what we're telling where investors are going to do, and that's a story that people understand. As I said, Horden Lake, there's a big piece of value there that is not being recognised in the market. We've got a strategy to improve people's understanding of that asset. There's a market timing, there's market sentiment. Now is not the right time necessarily. We're not the only project with an advanced copper project that the market's not really ascribing a lot of value to, but those things change with time as well. And so we're going and doing exploration at Belter, and there's very clear strategy, outcomes, potential to make a new discovery. That will open up, if we're successful down there, I think it opens up a huge opportunity, because there's a lot of targets, there's a lot of places that you can continue to replicate that work, and quite a lot of capital could, be put to work on that project. But we need to do it incrementally and get a proof of concept, and that's what we're doing. We're doing the best possible work we can do before we pull the drill rig out, and that's in this fixed loop survey to generate drill ready targets. and go and test some of them at the end of the day and try and prove up the thesis. And if we're right, I think that we'll be telling a different story. People will have a very different view. You look at the mineralization of Midram and Alotta, you've got multiple intersections of 10 to 20 meters at north of 2 plus north of 2 copper, north of 2 nickel, 3, 4, 5 grams a ton gold and PGE. If you find a new discovery that looks anything like that, I don't think we're going to be sitting here with a $7 million market cap. I mean, new discoveries, there's nothing the market loves more than a new discovery. And we'd love to make that. We think we've got the right ground, and we think for a relatively modest amount of money, we can actually exploit that opportunity. So, you play the cards you've been dealt, and these are the opportunities that we see in the portfolio. We're getting investor interest. Have people tell us that they'd love to see us to go and explore, and we, as a company, like I said, have always had the strategy to do this work, and that's the opportunity now. Horden Lake's not going anywhere. We've got some work that we can do to advance that project. And things change. So it's difficult to define a timeline, because you need to be flexible to react to the market, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, and who else is around you? Who's doing what in the region?
So at the belt, we've actually very interesting down at the belt here. We've got a fairly well-known neighbour, not so well known on the ASX, but certainly for the TSX, the Northern Hemisphere viewers, they might be more familiar with. They may not be familiar with the name Vior, but the management team behind Vior are ex-Cisco Mining, and those are guys that sold Windfall Lake for $1.8 billion last year, and they are essentially the management team of Vior. This is a company that has a junior company, has a very, very well-credentialed management team, and they raised $40 million when they joined, and they're doing 100,000 meters of drilling on the property next door to Lorraine. It's literally contiguous to our Lorraine project. Their project is centered around the historic Belterre gold mine. That's a mine that produced 750 or 800,000 ounces at about 11 grams a ton. So very high grade gold, not too dissimilar than the types of mineralization that we see on our property, and very aggressively exploring next door to us. So that's really interesting. And then obviously, people, the Abitibi players are very well known. You've got, Agnico and Iron Gold and those guys that have got big operations in that part of the world. And it's no secret, groups like Agnico have a whole, what they call fill the mill strategy, because they've got mills that are short feed, and they're looking for they're looking for projects to fill those. So making new discoveries in these areas are, you've got that support. Well, not support's the wrong word, but you've got sufficient people working in the area to help new discoveries move forward, because people can start to see how they get monetized.
Okay, so what next from you guys?
So we're busy in the field, and we've got results coming out. We put some out yesterday. We've got geophysical programs in progress, and we expect to be able to release those results as they come due. There's a survey that's finishing up very shortly over literally the gap between Midram and Alotta. So that's a really interesting place, given the quality of those two things, a few kilometers apart. The opportunity to have a look below that is really interesting to us. So more results like that. We're advancing the gold story as we put out that gold soil anomaly and looking to infill around that, and advance ourselves towards a drill program with that suite of targets that we've been talking about generating. So that's the direction. That's the sort of news flow that people have got to look forward there on Belterre. And then, up at Horden Lake, we've got some metallurgical test work that's ongoing. There's a resource update that can be done, because we did 1,500 meters of drilling, found a satellite deposit at Horden Lake that's not part of the current mineral resource update. So we can continue to advance the project and assess those economic alternatives that, start to play out how start to flesh out how that project moves forward.
Okay, well, look, good to catch up. Interesting to see, do stay in touch for us to build sort of what these drill results look like, and more importantly, when you start getting some traction in the marketplace, it'd be good to talk to you about how you're advancing things on the ground. Appreciate that.
Yeah, look, it's great to be back on the show after a big hiatus, and love to be back on again.
Just do the same thing again, won't you? Do the same thing again. Okay, cheers, bye.
Thanks, bye.